This will be scary and you will hate what you make no matter what. There's going to be like a big red sign that says stop. This is bad. You're writing something that sucks and is embarrassing and people are going to hate it, and that's just going to show up no matter what. It starts to become background noise the more you work with it. So, I mean, my main advice, I guess, would be not to get hung up on the outcome. Get focused on the moment that you're making and get ready to shoot down your doubt like a little whack-a-mole game. The thing that differs one artist from another is really making things for someone who's not. It's like they both have that voice. One person is choosing not to listen to it.
Welcome to the podcast, Tapping Creativity, with myself, Matthew C. Temple. And each week, we're going to dive into questions and issues and inspiration around creativity and the creative process. Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of Tapping Creativity. And this week I'm joined by a really special guest, Hallie Bateman, who is what she self-describes as an illustrator. She's based in LA. She's author of Brave New Work and also a book that she co-authored with her mother called What to Do When I'm Gone. Her work has been featured in national publications including The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, BuzzFeed, and many others. Today, she is joining us in part because she has a new book that just came out. It's called Directions, Really Good Advice for Getting From Here to There. And it's a lively, uplifting collection of old insights, observations, some aha moments, some of her own unique window into the way that she has chosen to see the world, I guess, and little epiphanies that for those of us who have the book can kind of dip in and out of. It's a wonderful little whimsical book. It's not a typical book because it is hand lettered on scraps of colorful paper with Hallie's line illustrations throughout. And I have to say, one of the things that I really liked about the book, or just kind of even the process, I just like the book. It's really just kind of fun to dive into. It's one of those books you can kind of pick up at any point and just get a little bit of bite-sized wisdom. I just loved that it was not actually meant to be a book. It was not some opus or some grand plan to do something big. It was really born out of whimsy, joy, and fun. So, Hallie, first, welcome. And secondly, I'd love to hear your story about creating this book.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me on your podcast. Yeah, this process of making this book was really unique because, my last project, the book I made with my mom, was something that was born out of this really, specific idea that I had, and there's a very clear narrative to the book, and there's a story, and it's really different when you're setting out to tell a story than something like this, which there's just no way I would have ever thought of this book if it hadn't revealed itself to me. So I started writing the very first directions one afternoon when I was just making art purely for fun. My brother was visiting. We chopped up a bunch of construction paper and we were just doing this exercise that I love to do where we draw or write until there's no paper left. So that was really the entirety of the activity, was like, we're just hanging out, we're drawing, we're writing. I wrote the first directions that day, and at the end of the day I was like, should I throw these away? And then I just decided to put them in an envelope instead of like literally putting them in the garbage, thankfully. And then I came across them a year later when I was moving apartments, and I pulled them out and I thought they were kind of funny, and I was like, sure, I'll post these. I shared them to Instagram, and I was really surprised at how much they resonated with people. I've always shared writing and drawing combined, and this was kind of unique because it was just the book has illustrations, but on Instagram, it was just the writing on these scraps of paper, and I definitely took cues from how much they resonated with people. I would not have written more of them if it weren't for the enthusiasm that people had. And so basically on my own, I I decided to continue to go into my office, kind of replicate that process that I had written the first ones in, where I tore up the paper, I ground my ink. I work with like calligraphy ink, so ground my ink on inkstone, like get the environment ready. I usually would like put on some music, smoke a little weed, adjust the lighting so that it's kind of a chill environment, and then would just write batches of them at a time. And in fact, it was an interesting experience to write them and to want to offer people, like people would say, we want more of these. So I wanted to offer people what they wanted, but at the same time, I ended up writing a direction that says, don't let their wanting it stop you from giving it to them. Because I definitely had that thing where I didn't want to do what anyone told me to do.
Right. Yeah, I get that. And I think that's one of the things that I loved about that, because I do find that very often one of the things that can hold people back who want to be bringing something out into the world is it going to be good enough? What are people going to think? Or almost more importantly, like, I need people to think it's a certain way. Like, I need to touch people in a certain way. And you begin to kind of hold back your own creativity because of what it might be. And one thing that I just loved is that it was something that either you discovered it discovered you. And I'm wondering, like, how freeing that felt, just to be able to do something almost like just because it happened, as opposed to like the weight of, oh my God, I've got to write a book and it's got to be good. Otherwise my publisher's not going to like it, or I'm going to, or I'm going to do a piece of work for, this, for this other author, because I know you're an illustrator and stuff too. Like, there's all this other pressure around it. And here it seems to me that, and it even feels like pressureless, which is wonderful.
Wow, I love hearing that. Thank you. That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's so different from, I've pitched many books before and had stuff not go through and dealt with that thing where you're trying so hard to get something realized and make it happen. And this book, the surprise of it and truly the thing where I mean, there have been times where I'm like, I don't understand what this is. I don't understand. I truly, when this book was coming out, I was talking to myself about, I'm like, okay, what are my expectations for this? What do I want out of this book release? What do I want to happen? And the main thing that I thought was, I really want the question to be answered of what is this book and why does it resonate so much? And I am learning that, especially through interviews like this and conversations like this, where I'm being asked to talk about it, because it was also such a, I often will post drawings or things where it's either it's directly about me and I'm saying this is my experience, or like, there's a lot of like captions and context. And when I posted directions, there was no caption, no context. It was all supposed to be said in the few words that were in the image. And I think there's something really different about that. Like you said, that it was kind of something that I don't have the answer of what this is all the time. Like, I don't, when I sat down, like I said, and created that space to draw, it was one of the most, I think it was the most, channeled experience I've had, where I'm not sitting down to write a story about blank. I'm sitting down to channel whatever wants to come out. And that's a really mystical, mysterious, and fun experience. And indeed, this book was, it's on construction paper. It's pretty simple. Like, people can see it's ink on construction paper. And it was a very free flowing creative experience that is not about, my last book was painted in great detail and took a year to paint like 70 paintings. And this book was not about the labor. It was about the freedom.
I love that. And obviously there's a place for both of those things in the creative process. There's not like sort of a right way or a wrong way. But I think that if you don't have that type of experience at some point, then everything becomes too precious and it almost becomes too difficult. It becomes your own creativity becomes an albatross instead of the exact thing that is there to really open your mind, to set you free, to be in this place of like, oh my God, I don't know anything. I don't know what I'm doing. And actually that's great, because that means I have to create. I need to create my way out of this like dark world that I'm in. It's like, what was it, like the purple crayon, right? Like I need to create a world that I want to be in. I need to create this thing, right?
Yeah. And it can feel, I think that I'm really comfortable, still uncomfortable, but, you know, as far as I can tell, compared to a lot of people, I'm really comfortable with the blank page and with the just getting over the hump of like, yeah, let's just start drawing. Like I feel like I really love the quick, I love making art fast, and I love like, I mean, that whole thing of just drawing until there's no more paper. I mean, I'm sort of a quantity person, and you know, I've done the thing where you paint a book over the course of a year, and it, like, you're totally right. It does have its place, and it was what that project required. But this is like my jam. Like this is my jam because I don't think I think I've been on some interviews where, you know, I'm kind of talking to someone who I could tell that they kind of think their kid could draw what I draw, and that there's that thing of like, well, so people pay you to draw this little like doodle that's like I can tell that there's some misunderstanding about that. But like how it's like, how do I explain to you that I've got precious moments of life to live, and I don't want to hunch over a desk every day of my life. I can get my point across clearly with a few black lines, and I think that's a skill, and that's something intentional, and like to some people that's not what art is to them. To me, I'm like, efficiency, yes, let's go.
Well, I'm looking at your stuff and I'm thinking that, you know, I've always been surrounded by a lot of very, very creative people. I was a Waldorf kid, so I grew up drawing and painting, and I'm just not great at it. Like actually kind of looking at your stuff is like, oh, you know, like I've drawn more and painted more than like the average layperson by a long shot. I just never got good at it. But kind of looking at your stuff, I'm also thinking like, you know what? There's actually an inspiration in that. I mean, obviously to be able to get your point across in fewer lines is the same thing in speaking or writing. You know, there's a famous quote from Mark Twain. My apologies, I would have written a much shorter letter if I'd only had the time. In that actually being able to get down to the essence, you don't get to get where you are by just like, if somebody picks up for the first time and says, oh, I want to do this. No, you actually have to get really good so that way you can be economical. Because if you're bad, you know, or not bad, but you know, it comes with skill. You know, you look at Picasso line drawings or whatever, right? It's like he didn't get there on his first go, even though some of the later stuff is way simpler, right?
Absolutely. And I also think like when you were talking about how you look at it and there's some inspiration in that, I was hoping that you were saying that my work makes you think, oh, maybe I could draw more.
That's actually exactly what I was going to say. I interrupted myself. Yes.
No, because that's really what I think about, and what I like from the very beginning of when I started to consider myself an illustrator. I thought, everyone is so scared of this, and it's so fun, and I really want to show people that it's possible, and there's something fun about having like utter confidence in and I remember one of my really good friends who knew me in college, who knew me when I was just starting to get into drawing. She talked about like watching me, like I would draw, you know, what at the time she was like, yeah, it was a not good drawing. And I would like hang it on the wall and just be so happy about it. And I love that because art, that's the whole thing of art. Good and bad do not exist. Like my friend looked at the same drawing I did and she was like, "Oh my God." And I was like, "I'm a genius." And I think that like the difference between you saying you're good and bad is a choice. And it's obviously filtered through so much of our experience, but I've always just had so much fun with the idea of kind of playing around with the freedom of just being like, yeah, I'm great. Like, or not that I always think that, but just the freedom of like, of not buying into the idea that art has to be a three-dimensionally shaded rose with the shadow on the right side. And like, it's like, I think that's also like, I didn't go to art school. I missed all that stuff. And I think there's freedom in that. I've always felt really lucky that I missed art school.
Interesting. Well, that's so cool. Well, that kind of leads me to my other question. So you're an artist, a writer, an illustrator. Tell me about your path to that career slash designation.
Yeah, so I drew a lot as a kid. My parents were both journalists, so in our house there was just there was a lot of books. There I read a lot. So I drew comics, I read comics, I wrote. I remember like for years I published my own like fake newspaper, and I would make movies, and I was just in retrospect I'm like, "Oh, I was just making art all the time," but I never thought I was an artist. Like my mom would, I would be sent home from school in like first grade. My desk would be crammed with papers, and my mom would be like, "Oh, you're an artist," and I would just be like, "Oh, no!" Like I really had no idea what she was talking about. Didn't didn't see it as art. And then my mom also wrote children's stories. She would submit to like Cricket magazine and stuff, and she'd be sending something off and I'd be like, "Oh, let me do a drawing for you." And I would like my dad wrote for the paper, and I would sometimes have a drawing in the paper. Like trying I was making art all the time, but I refused to see it as that I was an artist. And in high school, I would draw to make my friends laugh because my drawings were like silly and kind of bad. So the funny part was like, "This is so bad, but I drew it anyway. Can you believe that?" Like, and then so I go off to college and I studied creative writing, and I was taking poetry and fiction classes, and I was kind of like, I'm not. This feels all like a big exercise. Like I don't know why we're here in this classroom. I don't know why I wrote this. I don't really want to talk about it. Like I felt there was really some big block for me about the practice of writing something just to talk about it and criticize it. And then I took my first art class as really just to fulfill a requirement. I'd never taken an art class in my life. And they had us use those like old fashioned nib pens, you know, those ones where you dip it in the inkwell. And that pen, I drew with it and I was just like, I'm amazing. Like this is so like it made me like it kind of anyone can draw with that pen, and I'm telling you like it looks like the New Yorker. So you're excited about it. And I remember I drew like my first drawing assignment, my teacher was like, "That looks like it could be in the New Yorker." And I was like, "What?" And I discovered through that class art supplies and how much I loved working with these materials. And then I really just kind of like over the course of like the summer after taking that class, I I remade myself. I was like, I am an artist. I drew all the time. I started keeping a sketchbook. I just fully clicked into, oh, this is who I am. And it was so powerful to have that happen because I'd kind of been just making art without knowing I was an artist for my entire life. And so having this designation, as you called it, like an incredible freedom that made me feel like myself really for kind of the first time.
Wow. So this was kind of when it started, and then you finished college, and now, I think one of the things that holds people back, even those of us that create for a living, we get, there can be blockages, whether it's writer's block, or I'm sure there's drawer's block. There's that time. And one of the things that I've kind of discovered, I guess, kind of like the way that Africa was discovered. I discovered that, that the negative space is really, really important to the positive space. And meaning positive space is when I'm actually creating or doing something, and the negative space is where I'm saying, you know what? Not only am I not doing anything, I'm actually giving myself time to say, go recharge, go on a walk, just put a backpack on and go hike into the mountains for a week. And then I proceed to forget this great insight that I had, and then I have to discover it all over again. But I'm curious for you, particularly between the time when you discovered, hey, I'm an artist, then now this is what I do. This is how I apply my craft day in and day out again, sort of as it were. I'm curious kind of what was your process, or what worked for you to help you get to be creating and to continue that work, even when we all know there's a time when you're thinking, I'm bad at this. Why am I doing it? I should be doing something else because I'm no good. Nobody cares. There's that. But then you still have to show up every day, or maybe not every day, but at least every month and regularly, to get to the point where then you have 92,000 Instagram followers who want to see your drawings and your insight. And then you have books. So what was that kind of, what were some of the things that you found that really worked for you?
That's a great question. After college, I worked. So during college, I started illustrating for a blog that was unpaid, but it was, the writers were great. It was an alumni from my college who started the blog. So I had this venue for my work that was really fulfilling. I was published, while I was still in college, I was published every month online, and it was so much more of a motivation than my classes. And I was like, I'm an illustrator, I'm a writer. Or I would just I had I wasn't quite at writer yet, but I identified as an artist, and I was doing it, even though I wasn't getting paid, I was doing it. And I had no qualms about calling myself an artist. I was just I illustrate every day. I illustrate regularly, thus I am an illustrator. The verb defines it, not the pay. And so I think that I talked about not going to art school before, and I think for my specific chemistry, I think I would have been really crushed by art school. I really loved having a safe environment where I was kind of one of the only artists on campus, and I was able to really believe my own, drink my own Kool-Aid, as far as there wasn't a lot of negative pressure around me. And so one of the things that helped was allowing myself to be a big fish in a small pond, or a small fish in a small pond. I really established that I didn't need for it to be my professional title to call myself it. So I worked after college as a barista for maybe a year or something. And the whole time I was like, this isn't my job. My job is outside of work. And I actually I did want my title to match my profession. So I tried to get hired as a store artist at Whole Foods. I was like, that's how I'm going to do it. My job will be artist. It'll be in the title. No one will deny me. And then they did not want me. I was I tried so hard to get Whole Foods to hire me. They didn't want me. And then 6 months later or something, I got hired as a full-time illustrator at age 23. And I went back to Whole Foods and I was like, yeah, I'm doing great. I was pretty snotty about it, at least in my head. But yeah, I think that the whole thing of, I think a lot of kids graduate from art school or graduate with creative aspirations and are waiting for a fairy to come down and dub them real and say, yes, you're a real artist. here you go, you've finally proven yourself. And I don't know what it is about me, but it really works. I recommend, if you are doing it, you are it. Like,
Yeah.
well, this is all made up, this is like, unless you're a doctor, like the whole point of being an artist is that you're not a doctor. You don't need to go to 8 years of school. You can do it in your room, and you can call yourself whatever you want. I made up a word for what I am. It's illustrator.
That I think is also really important, because the imposter syndrome also, it doesn't only affect and infect people who are just getting started. I made my first movie when I was 23 or 24. I didn't make a living at that for another, I don't know, 5-ish years or something maybe. And even now, sometimes I feel like I'm an imposter. Like, who am I? Even though I've made a ton of stuff, that can kind of come all the way through. And I think that you're kind of talking to this thing of actually being able to be humble about it, because there can be a lot of sort of self-importance when you get to be an illustrator or a writer or a filmmaker or a musician or whatever it is you love doing. You get to do that and make money doing it, because so many people would like to do that. And so many people would like to don't, for whatever their reasons are. It can then also be a thing of kind of stepping into, wow, look, I'm like really important. I'm really special because I get to do this. Like, I don't work a day in my life, all this kind of stuff. Whereas actually, like, if we're continue to be artists, it actually means we're also continuing to live right at the edge of the unknown, right? Like, once you get good at it, at some point in like 10 years from now, if you're still like just doing this and this is like your jam in 10 years, there's going to be like, you probably won't feel super fulfilled, right? Because you kind of know how to do this, and you get to do that in part because, it may be something that you love doing, but if that's like what you do, that your definition is, nib pen writings, my guess is it would be like, well, now you're no longer the artist, you're like the craftsperson, and there's nothing wrong with being a craftsperson. I love a well-built table, right? But the artistry is in the part of the creativity really is I'm out on the edge of knowing. I'm out just somewhere on that border of I got this, and holy shit, what am I doing? I am way past my capabilities and everything. So yeah, I just think that your little bit of sort of insight there, I think is so applicable both to the person who's just getting going, or who's been doing it for 10 years with no sort of critical or financial success, or even, the folks who are making a living doing it, because we all go through those, those things of, I really do need to believe in myself. And in some ways in my industry, I think it's like, maybe, I don't know, maybe your industry too, but there's always this sense of, I just made a movie. No one's ever going to want to make a movie with me again. Like, I'm definitely not good enough. Like, I know people who've like won Emmys and feel that way. People win Oscars and just like, I worked with a guy, he was on a series for 10 years and he was just like, oh, and then he's not getting work and he's not getting work. And he's like, oh my God, maybe I just know how to play that one character. Maybe I'm a terrible actor. This whole thing is this kind of reminder of, yeah, make it and show up and do it and be okay with, in your case, you got to do it, and wherever it comes along in your journey, I guess I should say. Yeah.
Yeah, I do definitely want to be clear that I do have imposter syndrome. And it is, I don't have the thing where I'm like, I'll never make a book again. I think that there's different extremes of it. And I think there's something, and maybe this is like, you can speak to this as coming from the film world, but I would imagine that the way that, unless you're a very successful indie filmmaker, you are subject to what the money wants, and you only get to make your art when the money wants to let you make it. And yeah. I feel like that I could imagine feeling so disempowered in that situation, and that I actually started out wanting to be a filmmaker because I made so many movies as a kid, and I wrestled with that with having left that path for years. But I ultimately, I'm still interested in it in some ways, but I'm ultimately like, I turned to the thing that I can do in my room, and no one can tell me not to, and no one has to tell me to do it. I can just make what I want, when I want, how I want. And I think that the power of that is what helps me kind of be able to like separate my identity as an artist from the whims of the powers that be, if
Right.
that makes sense.
That makes total sense. We're in a unique moment in time right now, which is we're coming out of a pandemic. And I've seen things. I've talked to a lot of people. I work with creatives who are in different stages of their career as well. And one of the things that I've noticed is that some people are feeling like, oh, I had this like really great year, a year and a half, and I was able to do a lot. And then there are others who just felt like they were just wasting their time. Like, oh, I had this opportunity where I wasn't going to a job. I didn't have all this other stuff, and I could have, and I think there's also kind of some people who are just like, I'm going to take this easy. I'm going to ride this one out, and maybe feeling like, oh, now like I'm ready to kind of blossom. But I think that I'm kind of curious, what insight or advice might you have for people to actually take any inspiration that they have now and being able to actually turn that into a completed project, whether or not they were really prolific or whether or not they were just relaxing or whether or not they're beating themselves up over missed opportunities.
Wow. My heart kind of hurt when you talked about people who feel like it was a wasted year because, I mean, I'm just like, no, this year is a freebie. Like,
Yeah.
I just like, I really, uh, I just think there's so much pressure we put on ourselves. And like, yes, there are the Taylor Swifts of the world who can come out with many new albums in the middle of a pandemic, but it was a very difficult year for making art, even as someone who has a really a practice that's in a groove that's easy to, maintain. I'm just like, don't worry about that. You stayed alive. You're doing great. If you just cared for yourself in any way and remain here with us, then you're incredible. And then as far as like seeing a project into existence, I mean, I think I can speak to that because I'm in this phase where I'm doing these interviews about directions, and I always dread when people are like, so what's next? And I'm like, this is next. I'm still doing this. I just finished this book. Like
Give me a
let me
second.
give me a second. And but you are, when you finish a project, as I'm sure you know, like you're in this phase where it's like I don't know, you got married or you I just I just
You want
saw
the
this
honeymoon,
thing.
basically.
Yeah, like I just saw this thing into the world, and I started it years ago. And, when you're working with something for years, you can't really, there's a lot of projects that might have come up in the 3 years that I worked on this book that I didn't attend to because I was working on this. So when I come out of a project, I'm doing the thing that maybe your listeners are, where you're like, is it going to be this thing or is it going to be this thing? What am I interested in? What has legs? Like what's um what has potential, and what could hold me for a couple years? Like what kind of book would I want to do next? And I think it can be really scary to choose one because you feel like you're not choosing the other ones, and it's like feels like you have all this control. But in fact, what I think the lesson of this book is, you don't have control.
Right.
You'll what you need to do is make something, and it won't be what you thought. And there are things that you're interested in, and you can follow them, and you might follow it all the way till you're pitching it to publishers, and then they'll shoot you down. Like your job is to do that. Your job is to do with it, do with something what you can, and then release the rest. So like I have a few things that I'm kind of intrigued by, and I'm just gonna have to see. And I guess my advice for that would be, don't get stopped up with the fear. This will be scary and you will hate what you make no matter what. Like, no matter what. There's going to be like a big red sign that says stop. And that's like what you're like, I think I described the process where every time I sat down to write these, it was like, no, stop. This is bad. You're writing something that sucks and is embarrassing and people are going to hate it. And like, no, that's just going to show up no matter what. It starts to become background noise the more you work with it. So, I mean, my main advice, I guess, would be not to get hung up on the outcome. Get focused on the moment that you're making, and get ready to shoot down your doubt like a little whack-a-mole game. It's just Your doubt is gonna. I know one person who doesn't have that, but 99.9% of humanity, 99% of artists are having that voice that says stop, and they're making it anyway. And I think that's just like the thing that differs one artist from another. Someone who's really making things for someone who's not, it's like they both have that voice. One person is choosing not to listen to it.
Totally. That's beautiful. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us, sharing your insight, and sharing all your really good advice for getting from here to there in the book Directions. Yeah, we'll be looking forward to seeing you when you're doing this again, but I'm not going to ask you what the next thing is going to be because I've just been warned. But no, really wonderful having you here. And yeah, thanks again. And for anyone who's looking for the book, it is out now, and there'll be a link in the show notes where you can get your very own copy.
Thank you so much for having me.